The Almost Daily ZenCast and its various special segments are a production of C-Tag Studios, a collaboration between me, myself, and I that exists entirely in my mind.
This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. Hello, and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started.
Hello and namaste, and thank you for joining me. Welcome to the shared imaginarium of public discourse space that we co-create with each other in our minds when we enjoy these little chats together that we call my podcast, the Almost Daily ZenCast. Greetings. Because I've got a frog in my throat, I'm going to kick off with a little bit of music. What's up with the robot error voice, DJ Zed? Is this like a working title? Multi-layer project sequencing the foundation layer 1 idea sketch. Not gonna bore you guys with all of it right now. That's just a work in progress that the DJ Zed and I are working on. We're gonna layer in some other stuff. Maybe chop it up and spread it out a bit so it's not all compact like that. Maybe trim down some of those obnoxious special effects that we actually didn't like when we thought about it. Yes, indeed. Welcome to the show, dear listeners, one and all new and old-timey listeners. As always, I humbly thank you for choosing this obnoxious little bit of amateur podcastery for your listening, entertaining pleasure. I am quite moved and deeply grateful. Deeply grateful. Gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. This show is listened to by a slowly but exponentially growing audience of human peoples in over 25 countries around this living incubator for life that we pejoratively, sometimes dismissively call planet Earth. Someone recently asked me what my message was, and I think that question was haunting me a bit. So on a personal note, on a personal/programming note, I don't know how many of you guys tuning in, you individuals, you people, I don't mean to genderize my statement. I don't know how many of you humans with a Z, I like to spell it that way, because in one universe it's spelled that way and it's hilarious to me, tune into my other platforms, but I did a live stream yesterday, and I was a bit of a mess. I meant to jump on and do an Almost Daily ZenCast version of the live stream. weirdly, I couldn't. There's so many other buttons and details and widgets to fidget with that my brain goes to a totally different place. And while I can kind of do that over there, it's not the same as it's not the work that I do on the podcast. At least it doesn't feel the same, internally. That may sound like cuckoo crazy nut job thing to say, but then again, there seems to be an extreme. There seems to be a spectrum of people between two opposites. Those who have some awareness and some working understanding of some level or degree of their inner worlds, plural, right? There's multiple phenomena going on behind our surface sentence-making mind. And those who hardly even have an inner monologue and therefore do their thinking very quote-unquote objectively, but are essentially just they're the same functioning kind of human person. I'm not when I say there's two different kinds of people, inherently embedded in that statement is that all people are kind of the same. Genetically 9.9999999% ad nauseum identical. Therefore, the functional things beyond the surface identity and self-declaration, I think, while obviously expressing a wide range of potential behavioral modalities, to turn a phrase there, generally, I think, it could be argued all have the same fundamental range of motion, as it were. Who knows? I could be wrong in my leanings. But I digress. I rambled about sports ball and the big event the day before yesterday, and some weird thoughts I had about it. And the best moment, I think, in that video stream was when I actually got to engage with an audience member, and then my brain kind of got to a different place, a better place. But there's something different that I'm not quite adapted to. But I'm glad to be back here with you, audience, in this more customary headspace of attending our little public discourse monologue-y talk show moment together. If you're new, welcome to the weirdness. Please buckle in, keep your hands and feet inside the imaginary roller coaster car of your preferred design in your mind, and join me on a spiraling journey through some deep thinky thoughts and maybe not so deep thinky thoughts about all the wild different array of things going on in the world, and how if you thread so many certain needles with a through line, you get to a place where we might be able to discuss about all of it. We might be able to discuss all of it in a framework that makes sense and perhaps is a staging point or a leap-off point towards new evolutionary solutions-oriented possibilities. Because if there's one thing I understand life to be, dear friends, and if I may spontaneously wax philosophical before getting to any of the seemingly disorganized thoughts I had about what I wanted to say on this show today, if there's one thing I think could be said out loud and thought about and examined and agreed upon to be true, mostly, is that if you really step back and look, the human species as we know it and potentially life itself, as we think we understand it, and in ways that we don't understand. But yes, it's very explicitly true about the human species, although obviously it's a range of phenomena that has its peak and limits in various vectors. But the human creature, if you had to go one thing and say this is true about the species, as a collective description for the whole, it is a creature intimately involved with the phenomena of the use of imagination. One could say the human species is a species of imagination, right? Some future archaeologist from some other time may look back and say, humanity at some point before the postmodern era, and by postmodern I mean, the chapter O living history we currently find ourselves in, evolved to a point that it might as well have been reclassified or given a new name, and as a sub-branch of the overall Homo sapien species, and it should be considered Homo in something with the word imaginary or imagination. Homo imaginationis. I don't know how you would properly conjugate that into what, Latin? And curiously, there is quite a bit of disregard, disrespect, dismissal of, minimizing, and outright trying to destroy the imagination. And I think I left out character assassinate, like to totally try to discredit that which, the whole collective and individual phenomena that we call the imagination. And I get why, I think. I could be wrong, as always, friends. That's a big, giant, huge, on top of the entire corkboard disclaimer. Please be advised, I realize I could be wrong about everything. Don't go around accusing me of pretending to know some absolute truth. I don't. I'm sharing with you my deep thinky thoughts, as I like to call them, my speculative thoughts, my theoretical frameworks, my worldview, and my conclusions and observations based on a lifetime of questioning and debating with myself and others. What the bloody hell is this phenomena going on around us? Without falling into the pit trap and or ego trap, may I be so bold as to call it that, of blinding myself through overly strict, overly enthusiastic belief in any one given model or explanation. I take the widest view possible, akin to the Onists. I think that's how I like to pronounce their name. They say no one given organized religion has the absolute truth, but many important truths can be found scattered amongst them all. Which brings us to a theme of discussion that I was engaged in this morning on the social media platforms on the interwebs earlier today, whilst sort of dreading the process of getting ready to do this particular broadcast with you friends. 1414, bing! We're alright, we're on track today. 1420, you know what that means. A little musical break, so this hippy-dippy new age nut job can take a bit of a breather, quote unquote. DJ Zed, before you take it off, take it away. Let's extend a little bit and finish the thought there if I can retain it, if I can recall it, if I can reel it back in. This subject that I fell into, I was scrolling. I'm trying to be a little bit more diligent but efficient and not so lackadaisically doom scrollingly like zombie scrolling about my social media engagement, because it's a mosh pit out there, and there's a bunch of people out there who might consider might consider themselves, quote unquote, members of the audience of this and the other interconnected content creation projects that I share with the world vis-a-vis the interweb platforms of supposed self-liberating monetization, and others that wouldn't consider themselves members of that audience, but that are co-inhabitators of a loosely affiliated mob of other voices on a particular given platform with different approach or a different idea or a different thing. One of the many reasons why I like to talk about the ideas and not people is because fundamental to my worldview, for anybody who's not aware, is indeed a sort of fractal holographic declaration that we are all one in a fundamental way. Something I did end up meandering and touching on in the live stream yesterday. So despite however embarrassed I may feel about it as I reference it, if you're a long-time listener of the podcast but you've never checked out the live stream, you might want to go check it out. It's sort of similar but with visual aids. And I think I'll eventually get the hang of it. And get to a proficiency level where I feel like I have as much fun doing that as I do the podcast. Right now it's not as much fun, it's stressful. But I digress. We've talked about this on the podcast before. There should be, if there isn't, if I've been doing my own gimmick diligently, there should be a red pin on the imaginary corkboard holding up a few references to various other episodes that you might want to check out. Obviously, I wish that were a real thing that I could deploy in real time, and but that would require an army of employees, which I legit currently do not have because I'm not as of yet positioned to be. The audience is not yet quite so voluminous that I'm positioned to be a job creator, but that's one of my ambitions personally, so don't mind me touchstoning that right there. One of the pillars that I'll try to talk about here and try to share with you some of the potential interconnectedness with everything else. One of the pillars of my worldview is that what I just said earlier, that we're all sort of intrinsically one consciousness, or as someone geniusly put it, I am another you, you are another me. We're splinters of the same consciousness, wrapped up in, caught up in, enjoying the thrill ride of the individuation, which is a word that points to various things, including the experience of being an individual and living this individual life that we're having, right? And it's a collective phenomena, and arguably it's a fractal holographic trans-dimensional phenomena, but that's something that people often have either never heard of, so don't incorporate it into their own worldview, their conscious thinking about the worldview, and or are predisposed to disagree with for reasons we could spend all day picking apart and discussing. I mean, I don't mean picking apart like proving wrong, but picking apart like looking through them. But if we zoom back to this notion, and I don't, again, as plenty of people before me and around me say about their own content creation, I'm not here to require any blind faith belief. Support, yes. Audience engagement, always, absolutely. Everyone's welcome to participate. One day, that chat room over here on the Sprecher.com studio platform will be full of people. Not complaining. I'm welcoming in that abundance. The words are not the thing. Put a pin in that. And that's easy enough to forget and get lost in, right? That's a whole dense forest in and of itself. One could make the connection to some specific Zen teachings out of particular schools, of which the names I don't have on the ready at the tip of my tongue. But I've definitely spent enough time doing a survey of some of that spectrum of historical content to say, like, I'm familiar enough to be like, they talk about that, that perception defines reality as much as reality is perceived through perception. And for some people that sounds like a meaningless gobbledygook sentence to say. And one thing that helped me, literally and figuratively, and recursively, self-understandingly, self-introspectively understand, is a sort of, someone once gave me a dumbed down, and I say that politely, it was for my benefit. It was not a particularly overburdened with technical language and hyper specific explanations. A very simple, straightforward statement based on scientific neurobiological studies. Because the sensory apparatus that we think we reside in is mysterious AF. No matter what political party you belong in, no matter what belief construct you were raised in, no matter what ideological camp you've entrenched yourself in as an adult. When you take a good hard look at it, this phenomena, this collection of activities that include, in a necessary, like, biosymbiotic kind of way, millions of little things that arguably aren't even you, right? There are living things that colonize the body and help facilitate the body's functioning in many ways. But that's just sort of a curious, fun fact that we could go on a whole fun, interesting sidebar, and I often use as an analogy, but that's neither here nor there. The mind. This is the thing that helped me, right? Like, the body is a mystery. The mind is the crowning pinnacle of those mystery of mysteries. It's a system of systems that's alive, that we experience being, the best term is, embodied in, because it leaves the door open for a much more nuanced and sophisticated understanding of what that means, how that functions, and what forms beyond the typical may be involved, than in. In makes it sound like water is in a bucket. The present is in the box, right? That's really two-dimensional and simple, and and renders the body a container. It is inclined to lead to very mechanistic conclusions, consciously and or unconsciously. But then again, the unconscious and the subconscious and that whole realm is mysterious enough that even those who study it, have come to various conclusions that may or may not jive with one another. I think I was supposed to play some music and got sidetracked AF, didn't I? I think I did. Let's try to reel it back in even further and come back to this notion, right? Because I teased, there's something that helped me wrap my brain around it literally and figuratively and sort of fractally. And I'll drop this thought as concisely as I can, and then we'll play some music. The brain, according to some scientific studies, and yes, all the jibber-jabber arguments you can have about science and scientific studies, acknowledged, set them aside, put them on the bottom shelf. This, I think, fits into other things and makes sense, and I would love to be able to get into personally verifying it, and to some degree I think is subjectively personally verifiable. According to someone's writings elsewhere that are interconnected, it is, in a way that's like really wild sounding. But I digress. The sensory apparatus, I said concise, didn't I? The sensory apparatus gathers information and translates it into a hologram through multiple steps beyond what I just hinted at, right? The eyes see wavelengths of light that have been reflected off of objects, and it isn't as simple as like in the sort of, if Goofy was being used as an example, you'd see Goofy walking along in a sort of sidewalk in a void, and then there'd be like a single apple tree, and on it would be a single apple, and you'd get to like an up close, almost side cut view of Goofy's head, and you'd see the apple just off to one side, to the in front of Goofy, and you'd see light from the sun, who's like kind of lingering up in the corner, just peeking into the frame. There'd be a single beam of light come down from the sun, bounce off the apple, and land in Goofy's eye, and then you'd see the eye gather that in the retina, and the retina do kind of a Morse code of electrochemical signals that go to the wherever the visual cortex of the brain is. I don't remember offhand exactly what quadrant it, but that's a known thing, and it can be tested and verified. Although don't go chopping people up to test and verify that shit on your own. That's crazy talk, right? I digress. I don't know what made me think of that, except that I'm way too like horror movie thinker adjacent. I'm not super invested. I mean, I went through a period of being a horror book fan. So reel it back. The brain takes symbols like that, but it isn't as elegantly cartoonishly one-dimensional as all that, right? It's a cacophony of input. The eyes are taking in a massive literal light storm, tidal waves upon tidal waves of information that represents all the surfaces, bouncing back in all kinds of arrays, the visible spectrum and, of course, the invisible spectrum, the spectrum of light that we can't see, but that is still very similarly structured and therefore considered part of the same cohesive construct we call light. It's just our eyes haven't evolved enough to see it. The ears, and all the subtle ways that the body takes in other frequencies, because the one thing they have all in common, even when you're touching something, what you're registering is the frequency of the gap. The humming, you're registering the frequency generated by the gap between your smallest molecules and the smallest molecules of the object that you're touching, bouncing wildly around in the sort of mesh array that is the very gappy, very sort of quantum mechanically irrational, larger than Planck length place where quote unquote physical contact phenomena occurs. And the key thing that helped me go, is that, the brain renders, and that's a big word. It sort of is informative in and of itself. Go read some big fat dictionaries, many entry into what render can mean, and then mash them all together in your head. But it renders a hyper lightning fast, holographic, and arguably fractal, although I don't know how much the science uses that word, a fractal holographic model of everything being perceived, as well as everything being imagined alongside it, which is why our imagination can cloud our sight. And everyone's had this experience, jogging along, listening to a great jam, and having some daydreamy thoughts about some wish fulfillment thing, or some beautiful memory thing, or some nostalgia thing, or some hurtful thing from the past, whatever it was, some speculative meanderings about the future, and then we're no longer really processing the visual data. Our body's still piloting the environment successfully, probably with some increased margin for error, but I wish I could get into some, scientific data testing of that, but it's a known phenomena. If you've never experienced that, if you've never been sitting on a bus, or riding on a plane, or on a tram, or insert some or sitting at home on a chair, reading a book, and then daydreaming about what's going on in the book, and then getting sidetracked from whatever it is, and then finding yourself in the kitchen with the book, serving yourself a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or whatnot. My point being, these are really complex things that even the cutting-edge scientific investigation of only has a limited comprehension and a limited ability to describe, but that are fundamental core to the very thing we call being ourselves, the very phenomena of being whatever this ambulatory meat bag full of blood and bone and deep thinky thoughts and wistful imaginary thoughts is, right? And that if some of the phenomena we think we understand operates in ways we don't understand, if the athletes can make micro adjustments to their trajectory whilst twirling in the air, sure, with wild margins of error, but in a way that, according to the best of our known science, is faster than the supposed speed of the very nerves and the measurements we know how to take about them with technology that we use to study the body. What does that mean, and what are we missing? What aren't we measuring, and how do we figure out a way to measure it? Is the question I think we should all be sort of turning our eyes towards and sort of mindfully contemplating. And that if all of that is the case, why would we continue the ridiculous, absurd, and potentially arguably toxic socio-political norms and traditions around squashing the imagination, minimizing the imagination, abstracting belief down to just a meaningless credo or a zero impact credo, when clearly there's something going on that's operating at a deeper place and a deeper level, and that a lot of the distractionary noise sometimes even invokes as a bad thing. Whenever something's vilified, I go, why is this mysterious hocus pocusy thing being vilified, and also sort of denied, rendered, judged, dismissed as fake? So when the two options you've got for something is hypervilification and or baby with the bathwater dismissal as complete garbage, fakeness, that really makes you go, especially when supposed, science investigation keeps kind of butting back into things that connect. Right. Speaking of holographic models in my mind, DJ Zed is like staring at me with a raised and very judgy animatronic eyebrow, and ever so subtly tapping his fingers at me in a meaningful way. Without further ado, let's get into a little mainstream house on the Grove Pad app. Early nights, late mornings, DJ Zed. A little throwback to a while back. Not quite the early days, but just after the earliest of the early days. Huh, DJ? I'll stop talking. dig it, DJ Zed. If this track came on, it would drag me out onto the dance floor. And friends, you can enjoy all of these tracks and many more over on soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo. Actually, that's a bit of an exaggeration. You can enjoy a curated and audience engagement voted, how do you call it, what's the, my marketing brain just locked up. You can enjoy an audience engagement curated list. I don't know if that reads right for people, but it's curated by the audience engagement of DJ Zed's finest animatronic robot dance synthetica. The music of the Zeppoverse. SoundCloud.com/Mr. Zeppo. If you ever want to find the Zeppoverse and take a tour of its many dimensions, head on over to Solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. Okay. The mind creates a hologram, and then something inside of you perceives that hologram as if you were sitting inside of it. That's why the world, the natural organic world, feels dreamlike at times and objectively hard and concrete at other times, and it kind of fluctuates back and forth. I needed a second adjective there. A dreamlike and illusory, right? And that's undeniable. Materialists love to just brush that away and say it's all your imagination. Sorry, I try to avoid mockery, but I can't help it sometimes when people get on to some of their dismissive tropes. They sound like the adults in Charlie Brown to me. It's like, oh, so you're going to throw all the babies out with the bathwater because you either consciously or unconsciously are clinging to a very strictly Newtonian materialist view of the universe, despite whatever other religious-y things you might believe in or spiritual things you might believe in. Solid matter is not very solid. Dun dun dun. Cue mysterious music here. Dun dun dun. It's not. And it's not just a weird, whimsical, fun fact to be remembered for pub quiz trivia night and hitherto ignored otherwise. It's part of the entire holographic fractal reality that we are kind of deeply embedded in. Whatever the node, unity, black hole, white hole, singularity, I guess maybe, although that's obviously got multiple references kind of attached to it. Whatever the I am is, that also has religious baggage attached to it, but set that aside, set all those things aside. Whatever the perceiver is at the core of your experience, it is not in your eyeballs, right? It's not at the tips of your fingers. It's not on the edge of your skin. And yet it is intrinsically hooked up to those things deeply and in a way that boggles the mind when we try, especially if we try to simmer it all down to a mechanistic electrochemical process, and we ignore all the things that ancient mystics have been saying. Hey, this intangible phenomena is available to us, and some of it is an intrinsical part, an organic part, intrinsic and organic part of the way these human bodies function. I remember seeing back in my uni days, and I always want to put on a British accent when I talk about when I sat at a university setting and took a weird nutrition class that checked off an obscure science recommendation that I had been avoiding. By obscure, I mean I'd forgotten about it. Not that it was poorly known by the rest of the school population, but I had totally forgotten about this one last checkbox that I really meant to check off that quarter, or that year, rather. And then at some point I'd said, I really need to do it X quarter. And the quarter had come and gone, and I was like, oh shit, I really need to do it next quarter, because I didn't do it this quarter. I don't remember what it was called, but it was in part about nutrition, in part about the body's functions, and in part about research studies being conducted on some interesting things inspired by traditional Chinese medicine. And this is like 20 years ago. 1,100 years ago, however many dozen years ago it was that I was there, because I'm fairly certain it was at my first tour of duty, so the longest time ago. The memory I'm recalling is that the professor who was teaching the class, this wasn't like this was a curiously advanced level class that was available to anybody without any prerequisites. And it was advanced level because it wasn't being taught by graduate students, doing their second year thing, and not judging anything, but it was taught by the head of a research department, because in part it was exploring and discussing some of the studies involved in his own research, right? And he wanted to bring it to the world, because I think it was tied into some sort of interesting, nuanced new department or category of science or something like that. The details are hazy in my mind, but I assure you that my point I'm meandering towards, is very real. Some years back, a study was conducted using what was at that time cutting-edge magneto something scopotromic, I don't know. The technical terminology for the equipment used, I don't remember, but I was looking in a published book by a team of scientists, of which one was the person standing in front of me, who did indeed have graduate students doing teaching aid assistants kind of work, but it was the actual professor that was part of the team that was involved in the studies that made up the book, and its association, is part of a book that's part of this new generation of scientific investigation in medical sciences. All the official terminology for which I'm obviously blanking on, but 30 years ago. Not quite that long ago. Maybe yeah. No, of course not. 19 years ago. I don't know exactly how many years ago. More than a decade ago. A decade and a half plus some. The point is, the study had decided to try to detect if there was any measurable, scannable, phenomenological events occurring at the incision point of one of those hypodermic, what is it called? When you go to a place and they put needles all over your back. Oh man, my brain's just not wanting to play today with the vocabulary. It keeps not Tai Chi, brain. I'm embarrassed. I have a friend who practices this. An old friend, one I'm not like terribly in touch with. You all know what I'm talking about. And my brain is locking up. At any rate, in this study that I'm trying to recall, from a couple years before I was in the class, I don't remember how many years ago, but it was before the class, but obviously it had been done sometime, and then the things that led to this teacher teaching this class and this book having been published, or vice versa, historically, I'm sure. And what they found was that in key locations, but not off target, and I think for reasons that may not be obvious right up front, but that are important in the overall understanding, when done correctly, in other words, this insertion and twirling of this very, very, very thin needle, traditional style needle in the skin, activated these micro electromagnetic energy pulses that appeared to have unique geometries. Now, one might go, oh, they discovered chakras? Question mark? No, not quite, not from what I remember correctly. This was at the skin level, right? And chakras are arguably, whether you're thinking about the 7 main chakras or any of the other superfluous, chakras, because the chakra system at all has many more chakras than the main 7. But this is like just at the very needle point. And they explained, like, here are the different layers of the skin involved, and there was a little bit of grippiness at some of the connective tissue subcutaneously, I believe, and any further granularity my brain cannot give you. But the point is, what I can attest to you is that they're in the book referencing and explaining the scientific published study from however long back, was the ability to identify, using this particularly calibrated electromagnoscope or I don't know what kind of machine it was. It might have been an electron microscope, but sort of set up don't quote me on that. But it was some sort of something that used electromagnetic resonance imaging of some kind, but maybe it was an MRI machine. I don't know. But they were able to repeatedly measure and visually confirm this phenomena. Okay. I just offer that as fun, interesting, curious evidence, not to go too far out of field of my main thrust. The very complex and nuanced and easily pancaked and minimized cornucopia of subtle phenomena that occur behind the sort of focal point of our sort of top surface awareness is, we spend, even the smartest of us, like we've hereditarily, beyond the scope of whatever you might argue is going on in today's political climate, evolutionarily, we kind of put on or turned on some internal filters and hyper-focused externally. Thus the wisdom, to look within, etc. It would be wonderful to sort of round the bend and connect some dots and land on a point that I also sort of tried to make yesterday on the live stream, but I think it was way more disorganized about my thinking. It would be wonderful if we normalized the sincere and earnest investigation into this phenomena at an individual level, at a collective level, at a societal level, at a scientific level, at a cosmological level, at an anthropological level, etc. Right? And by proxy of the fact that a deeper understanding of the human phenomena would impact human behavior, this will, I think, lead to interesting and hopefully healthier than previous toxic political changes in politics. Like, it's going to lead to a healthy shift in the way we run our systems, to put it differently, right? Not to make, because I'm not trying to make this political, but although I do jokingly ask, where is the transcendental political party? Let's round out the show with some last words, some final thoughts for today, as I decide which bit of music to close things out with. Oh, I got into a discussion earlier today to reconnect some dots about belief, right? And someone commented, because I had posted a meme I made forever ago that says, belief manifests, choose wisely, or choose your beliefs wisely, one of the two. I forget which version is the actual meme, because I know I made at least 3 different versions of it before I picked one. Someone brought up the term magical thinking. And I don't know, and I didn't mean to project on their intention, but I don't know how they meant to use it, but magical thinking, in my experience, especially in public discourse on the interwebs, gets used to dismiss a wide array of things, some of which are actually very real, and that if we had a deeper understanding of, we might evolve behaviorally as a species. Crazy thought. And I think that one of those things is a deep and complex multi-level look at fractals, fractal mathematics, fractal holographics, and the hitherto sort of, I don't think this has been a declared science branch, but like fractal consciousness. If I was coined a term in my use of that here or otherwise in the past or in the future or in other dimensions or in other timelines, may it serve as a sort of focal point to converge, for minds to converge on. It's easy to dismiss that which we've never experienced. And I'm very aware that there is indeed a sort of toxic magical thinking. And I don't mean to sound hypocritical, right? Like, yes, we must be wary of being sold a bill of goods, a set of belief totems that are ineffective and render nothing but more power to those who sold them to us. As a matter of fact, I always kind of giggle, and I don't mean that dismissively, when people point out, to me, some of the political shenanigans and some of the power play shenanigans and some of the spirit war shenanigans. I'm like, no, I'm well aware. My commentary is coming from a perspective of trying to utilize that, right? If that makes sense. There are many callings. But I don't think that any of the callings are so tyrannical in their request that we can't continue to be the people that we are and continue to strive to improve and better and lift up the communal experience we share here in this material dimension. And currently, it's organized in the way that it is organized. All theories and whatnot aside, I'm talking about what I can observe and confirm. The world is no utopia. And now, just like materialists will knee-jerk dismiss anything that borders on or makes them think of the trigger term magical thinking, thereby missing out on legitimate magic, legitimate phenomena that are quite magical in their nature but are otherwise very real, which is a whole different thing, right, than what they think they're dismissing. That's why the baby's in the bathwater, and we're some of us are like, don't throw the bathwater out just yet, because if you throw the baby out with the bathwater, consequences ensue. I think I've discussed before in the show, and I'm sure I'll come around to talk about it again, so let's consider it a pin on the board. Organic magic, if we can coin a term, the cosmic magic and things magical, to give it a little fancy twirl, that are actually inherent in the universe should not be swept under the rug, dismissed, vilified, marginalized, decreed as fake or otherwise declared work of Satan, etc. at all, along with things that are phony baloney, right? Things that are phony baloney should be phony baloney. I don't think that sending $1 to a preacher in a church is going to make money magically appear to me, unless there's some sort of Ponzi or pyramid scheme effectively attached to that. I doubt that I could ever sit in a room adorned with no matter what supposed tools, spiritual tools or weapons or otherwise, and will into existence some small fortune in current immediately usable currency. I don't think that that's the way it works, but I do think that belief structures tightly clinged to, sublimated into the mind, do indeed interfere with perception. It's a different category of phenomena which could be dismissed with a diminutive of similar make, if I may be so bold as to posit, right? So simultaneously, the use of ideological constructs and belief structures is very real, no matter how fake you want to say the beliefs may be, right? There's some weird, bizarre synergy with some different conversations that I've had at different times, on different platforms, in different ways. And one of them that comes to mind right now is the one about the book burning. Someone came at me in that discussion, and I don't mean to call them out. I'm just saying that, I posted something about these book burnings that appear to be happening, and they came at me with fake news. But they had missed my point, which is that, and it's my fault. I had posted a very vague and easily misinterpreted statement, and I didn't technically do it on purpose. And I did get accused in that conversation of doing what I was calling out, supposedly, which is saying something that causes people to argue. I got distracted. To belabor the full story real quick, but I'm hoping this might be a fun invite to those who participated in that conversation to check out this episode. or the podcast in general. When I had started to write this other comment, not about the fire, but this other comment, but it's all interrelated and synergizing with itself. I'd open with the phrase, this whole insert thing, whatever it was that I was talking about here, is nonsense, ... And I was going to go on to say, because I don't even want to bring up the subject, right? Like the issue at hand. I don't want to even bring it up. Because I'll distract myself with sort of trying to contextualize that. This whole thing is nonsense, ... And I was trying to find the wording for the basic idea that it almost doesn't matter what did or didn't happen, because both sides of the American political echo chamber, the traditional two-party echo chamber system, are being bombarded with sort of inverse narratives, and given the prompt or the assurance that the other side is being misled by lies and manipulative content. But they're like they're like yin yang in their puzzle piecey fit. Okay, so when I'm saying my thought was like a 3-part thought, and I only posted the first ellipsoidal opening act of it, because I got really swept up in trying to figure out how to phrase that in as clear and as simple of a way, and at some point my finger strayed and it hit send, and this whole conversation ensued, and we went back to be like, oh shit, I better edit this. Someone was yapping to me about like, this is all fake news, and I'm like, I'm not even talking about that, man. Fake news or not, just like with the book burning, because someone came in at that with, this didn't happen. It didn't happen. Well, the preacher is posting videos, the congregation is posting videos. Well, it's a psyop. Okay, fine. Yeah, you're talking to a guy who made a meme that reads psyops are everywhere, or something like that. I always forget what the exact wording is. I think it's just psyops everywhere. Yes, but like, if its intention is to encourage others to embolden their own bad behavior along similar lines, it needs to be called out, and called out in the appropriate way, not just dismissed as irrelevant because someone told you it was fake. And so one of the babies in the bathwater that I'm concerned with is the potentially very real phenomena that arguably, on the other side of the fence, there's potentially verifiable, repeatable, personal, interdimensional phenomena that can confirm such claims around the human species being all interconnected in a very subtle but ultimately accessible spiritual energy and emotional and cognitive network of many networks, and that it has many moving parts, much more complicated than the system I just spelled out in the sentence I just constructed. If that is real, and there's an image that I used yesterday in my live stream, if that is real, and that image and sort of my analysis that I applied yesterday in it are valid, are pointing in the right direction, let's say, and granted it's symbolic and allegorical and not literal, but it's there, why are we arguing about any of the politics? Right? That's my worldview. Oh, you guys don't want to take any of the wacky cuckoo nutjob new age crazy ideas that I bring to the table seriously? Okay, well then hold on, I'll talk some politics with you. But before we don't talk about politics, why waste time arguing about anything else when we can, could, should, would, ought to be following in the footsteps of Buddha, in my favorite, as spelled out in my favorite Buddha quote attributed, of rediscovering yet again the inner path that leads to a higher self-awareness, a higher mutual awareness, and who knows what else. Especially if, dear friends, as many people have tried to warn us, we cannot solve the problems we create with the tools we use to create them. Perhaps, though, if we tap into tools of a higher order that are natural, organic, and as real as the moon and the cosmos itself, just not out there in a tangible physical way, but in here in a sort of quantum distributed metaphysical way. And I say quantum distributed with a hyphen, as in, like, you know, quantum entanglement? Perhaps quantum entanglement isn't a singular discrete phenomena between individual subatomic particles that become quantum entangled, but rather a road sign towards a deeper mesh of entanglement that is fundamental not only to our very phenomenological existence in these ambulatory, semi-conscious, semi-unconscious, semi-autonomous blood and bone sensory apparatuses, but to the very form and function of the cosmos as it exists in those ways that we've yet quite come to understand. Because it's all one holographic living fractal bound up in itself and bringing into existence all the infinite possibilities that probability waveform functions can describe. Really wild, wacky, way too big worded thoughts. If our brain makes a hologram of what our senses perceive, and what our senses perceive are themselves holographic in nature, because at the building blocks of solid matter is a sort of fractal holographic vibratory system of frequencies that vibrate nothing, or some emergent coalescing event of emanating, form and frequency from a void that's beyond language and description. And that nothing truly makes up everything, and everything truly is nothing. Then, is it really all that far-fetched to imagine that the living cosmos itself is some fractally recursive, exponentially more massive, but also eerily very similar, yet wildly more complex, and therefore intensely more nuanced mind of manifesting through the multi-textured processes of imagination, of emanating from apparent nothingness, information that gives rise to form. Isn't that what the imagination does in the human mind? There's an apparent void of nothingness. There's sensory data intake that goes where? We don't know. It apparently doesn't get physically recorded in the brain as we used to imagine. It goes somewhere, and then this imaginarium, this theater inside of ourselves that can overlay on top of our eyesight lucid, vivid, highly detailed constructs that don't yet exist, but that the mind has conjured up, and that the spirit of curiosity and artistic expression then brings into existence. we should normalize that. We should re-normalize a deep intellectual exploration of these ideas, a deep phenomenological exploration of these ideas. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. That's one of the things I'm working on in this podcast, beyond the scope of the words I'm saying. And get into a professional sciences. Let's not conflate professional sciences with industry, right? And the impact of the corruption that tends to often emerge when something grows so big that it becomes an industry. But that's an issue for another day to explore. Belief, whether you consider it sort of just a collection of words or something more, I would argue, regardless, should be chosen wisely. Because one way or another, it resonates with impact, both at an individual, personal level, in terms of how our rational understanding comes to supposedly logical conclusions, right? Just look at the state of things in the world today. Don't tell me people's choices aren't being driven by their beliefs. Yes, there's a lot of emotionality going on, and that's, of course, an easy one to dismiss, but we shouldn't dismiss emotionality either. It leads somewhere if we contemplate those things, not with an external eye for criticizing each other's form of behavior, although that isn't necessarily inherently bad. It's a Wild West seesaw of antagonizing each other at this time, but it can also be a productive form of public discourse. But I digress, friends. I'm trying to work my way towards a reasonable salutation and closure to this episode. I thank you for joining me on the winding path of these weird and weary thoughts that struggle ever so awkwardly to escape my mind and propagate, because not because I think I'm important, but because I think that we all share a calling to engage and process and challenge one another, to avoid the distractions and the pitfalls and the ego traps, and to grow towards an evolutionary individual and collective comprehension of these things that many are caught up in dismissing as impossible nonsense, because there seems to be something there. And if, I mean this sincerely, based on a lifetime of questioning, struggling, doubting, fearing, and wondering, what the bloody hell does it mean if this is true? Because if there is something there, and we can rally the collective consciousness towards a deeper, broader, more nuanced, more insightful collective and individual understanding, we can radically transform the collection of crazy chaos-making enterprises that we find ourselves intrinsically interconnected to and sort of, lashed to. And change is always what's being discussed and debated and argued and thought about. What if we took a moment, collectively, take a big deep breather and reevaluated what kind of change? Maybe swapping ideologies out for other ideologies and trying to refine and craft some perfect ideology isn't the way. Maybe abdicating ideology in order to attenuate and reconnect to these subtle, nuanced, but deeply real and organic phenomena that have been collectively dismissed, maybe that is the way towards a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other. For more on that other things that you might find along the nexus of a commentary targeting current events, public discourse, political ideology, and transcendental spiritual whatever you want to call it, because it's not, I'm not trying to start a religion here, although sometimes I wonder why I don't. Would I be in a better position now if I had, many years ago when I very first thought of it, applied all my available charisma points towards starting my own hippie new age transcendental religion, despite the implicit ironies and potential pitfalls and problematic issues with organized religion at large, than I am now? Who knows? Am I in a not so distant alternate probability waveform function branch from my mainline tree trunk of my many multiplex universe selves? Am I already doing that? Perhaps. Yeah. Am I inclined to do that here? No, that's not my overt subject. Although, if one sort of growth forms up around me, I might be inclined to lean in. Well, I'll be honest with you. But I'm not actually, consciously, and I say this to you now, as a matter of public record, as part of the silliness of this show, and me rambling on for way too long, it is not objectively or consciously one of my goals or purposes. I flirt with the silliness of it because my mother once made a comment many years ago, and I felt what I thought might have been one of my earliest and most lucid awarenesses of a probability waveform branch, splitting up down two core potential outcomes along the lines of should I focus my energies at this young age towards starting my own religion or getting involved in religion, its own sort of branch that has many sub-branches, or not, and everything that came with just not as the other branch. But maybe I'm crazy. I think that we have these moments, and we romanticize them, and we describe them artistically, and we talk about the fates and free will and freedom and whatnot. But we kind of also simultaneously, culturally, collectively poo-poo them and squash anyone who talks about them any more tangibly than the sort of whimsical rom-com universe level of it. But as I was trying to speak towards yesterday in the live stream, imagine a world where we had a better understanding about all things relevant and factual and real that have been lumped together in the things that maybe aren't, in the world, in the spectrum or cornucopia of things spiritual, pseudo-spiritual, cosmic, transcendental, religious, esoteric, occult, etc. There's a lot of baggage there, but if we separate the wheat from the chaff, and we pursue those things that correlate, that we pursue the language and the deeper refining of the language that correlates with phenomena that can be experienced, therefore re-communicated and experimented and re-explored by others. Just imagine the possibilities. Could that be used for nefarious purposes? Indeed. Could they already be using that against us for nefarious purposes while simultaneously distributing misleading, fear-mongering propaganda designed to make you feel like you've aha-momented the system but is actually leading you further and further away because its strongest potential outcome is conflict, argumentation, and sometimes, unfortunately, irrational bouts of violence? Questions we must put up on the pin of corkboards. Up on the corkboard of pins. Pardon the spoonerism. I didn't plan that. That just happened. I really am this quirky and weird in real life. And apologies to any of my crossover audience or just in spirit to any of my game stream audience, I totally meant to do Mechamania Madness on a Monday yesterday, and I did not. I'm trying to catch up on the slack and tighten up the show of shows and get the ball rolling into bringing you all the more almost daily variety content streams, a little bit more daily and a little bit less almost. As always, I humbly thank you for tuning in. That's the show today. I've run out of steam and out of vocal cords that are willing to vibrate at the right frequency without pain. Until next time, I've been your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.
And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily ZenCast with your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.